Thanks, Duke, for taking our time and being with us today here. Really excited to learn about your journey and understand more about the world of powerlifting. Appreciate you for your time, and I think we can just kick it off with a short intro, background, and then jump into a few more details about the industry and the landscape.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on here. Um, I'm Luke. I'm a powerlifting coach. I'm originally from New Zealand. I've been coaching since about 2018 after I finished my bachelor's and got into kind of general fitness population coaching, and then slowly steered more towards having a strength focus. So currently, I work with powerlifters, some strongman athletes, and basically anyone who's interested in getting strong, whether for the pursuit of strength purely or whether they are needing some strength training to supplement their sport or running or just general lifestyle stuff.
That's great to hear. I think would love to understand a little more about you. You might have started out as an athlete and then probably transitioned to a coach. How has this journey been? And if you could just share what was the inspiration to get into powerlifting, because at least for me it sounds very intimidating. I see these guys lifting heavy weight. It's just a lot intimidating. So wanted to understand what's the inspiration and how has the journey been like for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess my kind of sporting interests started relatively young. When I was in school and high school, I ran and I did some martial arts and played rugby. From New Zealand, it's kind of a staple. And then once I finished my bachelor's and I was kind of into my adult life, I powerlifting became sort of a natural progression of it was a sport that you could compete in as an individual. So you didn't have to make team trainings or anything. It could fit around your schedule, and was a good competitive outlet for that. Um, I the first got introduced to it because I started to work alongside some other coaches who'd had some experience with it, and sort of got introduced to the sport that way. And then just found it to be a really good community. It can seem quite intimidating, but if you've ever been to what we call a novice powerlifting meet, or like the kind of first place that you'll compete in powerlifting, uh, they're super friendly. Like everyone's super supportive and everything, and there's a lot of people who are just getting into it themselves, and aren't necessarily putting up superhuman numbers on the weights they're lifting, but are just trying to better themselves each time they go to lift.
Got it. That sounds like a great progression, and I think I did meet a couple of powerlifters in this journey, and everyone are usually these very gentle giants. They're just so calm and just do their own workout and stay in their
Yeah,
zone.
yeah.
On that note, do you want to talk about a few misconceptions that people have in this particularly specific to powerlifting? I think often there's a lot of because you lift heavy, are there something you should be concerned about, or any misconceptions that people have?
Yeah, I think a lot of people assume that if you're going to do something like powerlifting or even just lifting weights in general, that you have to kind of take it all away and you have to get as big and strong as you physically can. Whereas I think a lot of the time, a lot of people would benefit from just getting involved or kind of starting down that path, to becoming stronger than they currently are, putting on a bit more muscle. Um, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to become your whole life and you have to try and deadlift 3 times your body weight or something like that. But even just getting to um, like a healthier level of strength can be a good thing. And often that, like, what you do to get super strong and what you do to kind of get to a strength that's going to facilitate your lifestyle can kind of look quite similar. So I think sometimes when people hear that there's a coach that does powerlifting, or a coach that is interested in the kind of upper echelon of the strength side of things, they assume that it's totally disconnected from what they need, as maybe just like um, a non-competitively interested person that wants to that wants to reduce their back pain, or get rid of a few niggles and just be able to get along with the things that they like doing.
Got it. Got it. That's great to hear. And I know we've been talking for I think 2 3 weeks now. We're sort of building a new vertical
Mm.
for powerlifting. I think with your advice, we're going to launch a new modules. Can you talk a little more on how you feel some of the automations that working on can help potentially powerlifting coaches and also athletes?
Yeah. So I guess to give a bit of background to that is that over the years, like many coaches in the strength space, I've sort of been developing different spreadsheet systems um, and tools to help me better coach my clients and better handle their data and better give them recommendations and all that sort of thing. But it can end up being quite clunky and a little bit non-user friendly. But it's often better than a lot of the fitness apps out there that just don't have the functionality or the tools that you need. And so it's been really cool, like you said, in the last few um, weeks that we've been communicating, is you guys being able to take sort of inspiration from some of the systems I build out, which are also, again, like somewhat similar to what a lot of other coaches in the industry are using, and actually building those into an app so that you can have like a really good delivery, really good usability. It's not as intimidating for some people as having to try and use a spreadsheet, but still being able to actually have all of the tools and be able to manage the data like you need to do a really good job of coaching.
Yeah, I think we were also very excited when we saw the way you coach. We felt like there are a lot of you go very engineering level of understanding of how to write those programs, and it's very lot of deep work that you did there. And we felt that those could be automated. It will definitely save you a lot of time and for your athletes. So we are also very excited to get this rolling and get it into the hands of a lot of other coaches. Great. On that, I think
Yeah.
now that we are talking about programming and these methodologies, would love to understand how do you typically approach creating a program for your client or an athlete? What are the things to consider? How do you typically create those blocks? If you could talk a little on that, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. So I think one thing that's important to understand when approaching this is that the like scientific literature and best practice from other coaches and stuff can be a really good place to start when you're coaching a client, and can give you a really good baseline for their, say, initial training block that you're doing with them, or their initial kind of program. But that inevitably people are individuals, and what they respond to can vary a little bit from kind of what the average is in science, or it can vary quite a lot. And so the app being able to uh, have the tools and be able to record the data the way it does allows you to really individualize that process over time, and to actually take a block of training, whether that be 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or however long is kind of a standard unit of programming for the coach, and then being able to iterate on that and make it better and better as you go. And if you don't have a way of recording that, then that data is just lost. And every time you write a new program, you're just guessing on what adjustments should be made. And equally, with a lot of other software, even if you can record it, the being able to use it and being able to do the like analysis and even just be able to see the kind of trends of what's working and what's not can take so long that it becomes then unfeasible to do for every athlete. So you either have to work with like two people and just spend your time looking at their training, or you just end up sort of only being able to use half of what the training data could provide you, because it just takes so long to filter through. So having a tool that allows you to both record and then use that super efficiently really helps. So, um, a lot of the time when a first new athlete comes in, we'll kind of look at some of their basic like demographics and their training history and sort of their baseline details, and then based on previous experience and what learned from coaches and other mentors, and then the scientific literature itself will create that sort of first program that we're like, we're pretty sure this is going to work to some extent. And then based on how that goes, if that goes really well, then we might run something similar again if their goals remain the same. Or we might then make adjustments based on that, say if we saw that some areas went really well and some areas didn't. So yeah, it's really important if you're going to do a good job of coaching somebody and not just kind of throwing generic stuff at them all the time, to be able to actually efficiently be able to look over their training data and have some structure to that. I think the other thing that the changes that you guys have been making to the app does really well, is compared to some of the other training apps, is that it can take a really long time to write a custom program. And so again, when you're time constrained as a coach, you sort of will just end up leaning more towards sending them something that's mostly templated out, because you just don't have the time to go in and like individually adjust all of the numbers. And so with the sort of protocol setup that we've been building within the program, It allows you to get even from like a completely blank slate to their full program, to get from what's in your head onto the app like as quickly as I think is possible at this point. Um, and I think that means that, even if you only have so much time allocated to each client when you update their program, it allows you to be able to provide a better service and high level of individualization and customization for them.
That's great, Lou. Sounds like a lot of effort goes into creating a plan for an athlete, and we're glad that we're working on a few components that can at least automate a few workflows. And I think when you just someone is, let's say, just starting into getting into powerlifting, they've been gymming for a couple of let's say years and want to seriously pursue powerlifting. What would your advice be? And are there any some of the common mistakes or patterns that you've seen athletes do when they very quickly get into this thing? It would really help a lot of people understand what level of caution should they approach into getting into this.
Yeah, I think for powerlifting specifically, I think one of the main things people get wrong from the beginning, or could just benefit from doing differently, is waiting too long to actually go and compete. I think a lot of people will be like, "Oh, I'll wait until I'm, strong enough to go and compete." But really, you're never going to feel like strong enough to go and compete until you're, one of the top in your country or something. So there's no point waiting that long. And there's actually a lot of skills and experience that you get from your first initial competitions that are totally irrelevant to what you're lifting at them. But it's just about getting used to the experience. So, like, if you're interested in getting involved in powerlifting, the best thing that you can do is learn how to do the squat, bench, and deadlift well enough that you can do them to the standard that is required in comp, because otherwise you get disqualified. So you want to be able to do those movements to the baseline standards that are set out so that you can actually complete the competition. And then I think once you do that, you can pretty much just sign up for a local competition and get started, because there's so much to just learning how competitions run and how you react to the day. Sometimes you think you're going to be really nervous and you're not, or you don't expect to be nervous and you are. And so just getting familiar with that early on in the process, I think, is really important. I think another thing that I was probably somewhat guilty of, and I think a lot of people are, is not getting like help or advice early enough. Powerlifting competitions are so much more enjoyable if you have somebody there to kind of hold your hand through the process. So either like a friend who's done a lot of competitions, or a coach or a local coach that can be there at the competition, that can be like, okay, they've said this now, that means you're going to have to, wait a bit of time, or okay, you want to make sure that you go get a drink or go to the toilet now because you're not going to have time later, and just those sorts of like logistical things can add a lot of stress to the day if suddenly something comes up that you weren't expecting. And so if you can have somebody there who's been through it, done it a bunch of times, they know what to expect, they can make it so much more enjoyable, and you can just focus on like getting your head in the game and performing well and enjoying the process, rather than trying to figure out all of this as it's happening in real time. And then I think probably the last thing that I'd say is a lot of people look at how strong they can get in like 6 months or a year, and they try and prioritize that. Like, I want to lift this weight by this date, and set like very short or midterm goals. And realistically, people who get good at powerlifting are people who train consistently for a really long period of time and without any major injuries, so that they don't have to have time away from it. And so I think if you are entering into the sport, approaching like your day-to-day training sessions and like the intensity to which you lift and kind of everything along the way, with the idea of, okay, I want to be as strong as I can be in like 2 years or 5 years, rather than, right, let's see how hard I can push this to see how strong I can get in 6 months. Because realistically, even if everything goes perfectly, you're still not going to be that strong in 6 months. Like, you're probably going to be a lot stronger than you were, but on the overall scale of things, is like only so fast your body can get strong. And so I think trying to optimize for like, it doesn't even have to be like long-term progresses in like 10 years time, but like longer term progresses, and looking at the next like 2 to 5 years and be like, okay, I want to train in a way so that I can train uninterrupted for the next 2 to 5 years. You'll be way stronger in that end, rather than, I see a lot of people who will like train like an absolute animal for 6 months, get hurt, have to take time off, retrain back up to where they were, get hurt again, and they end up spending 2 years sort of on this little repeating cycle, and they're kind of a little bit stronger by the end, but they've had a lot of back and forth, as opposed to if somebody took it a little bit more conservatively, they might not be as strong in 6 months, but they're a lot stronger at 2 years. So yeah, I'd say like get in sooner and compete, get help sooner, and then just take like a slightly longer term approach with things.
That's definitely a great piece of advice. I think things compound very well if you give it enough time and be very consistent in doing things. And I think getting help is always important. When someone who's been there, done that, it definitely adds a lot of value. I was just curious to
Mm.
know about the competitions. Is this something that anyone can participate, or you need some level of recognition or certifications to be able to participate as an athlete? Just curious to know a little more on that.
Yeah. So I can only talk to, so within powerlifting, there are several federations. So like different organizations that have governing bodies that organize competitions. And I can only talk to IPF competitions, which is sort of the biggest and most recognized international federation, but they all sort of have different rules around it. So whatever I say is in relation to IPF because I haven't been involved much in the other ones. Um, but normally, what you can do is you can do two novice competitions. So a novice competition means you're not actually signed up as part of the organization yet. You haven't had to like pay a membership fee or anything, which normally aren't too much anyway when you have to get to them. But you basically can just like sign up via whatever online form for your local powerlifting affiliate, um, and turn up on the day and lift. Um, in those two novice competitions as well. So you're allowed to do two of them before you have to like sign up. Uh, Within those first two as well, they are more relaxed about the equipment specifications. So once you go to what's called like sanctioned competitions, where you're competing as an official part of the organization, there are certain brands of equipment that you have to use for certain things just to make sure that everyone's kind of got a similar style and level of equipment to standardize the competitions a little bit more. So in those novice competitions, they're a lot more relaxed about that sort of thing, and it really just gives you an easy way to get into it. So, yeah, the only place that you have to start, you know, being a certain strength level or having like qualifying for things is if generally if you want to compete at the national team within your country. A lot of countries, even if you want to compete regionally, so like not just at the club level, like your local, I don't know, suburb or whatever, or city, but if you want to compete for like the wider region within your country, most of those you just still don't have to qualify for. You just have to have done like a competition beforehand or something. But yeah, so you don't really need any particular qualification or specifications until you get up to like a national or an international level with things.
Got it. That's helpful to know. Thanks, Luke. Then I think just given that how intense these are from in terms of their competitions as your own personal journey to be a powerlifter, have you seen any patterns in terms of any biggest challenges powerlifters face, or how have you helped your athletes at least to overcome some of the challenges that they come across every day?
Challenges they face with trying to compete, or challenges they face with their training, or just kind of everything.
I think in generally, be it physical training, mental blockages, or anything that you have seen while they're training for competitions, very in terms of the general spectrum of things.
Yeah, I guess similar to if people have had other sporting experience, sometimes the training you're doing day to day, it can be hard to, especially if you haven't been doing it for very long, see how that fits into the overall picture of things. And so there's a little bit of having to trust the process, know that you've, got the right advice, or you've educated yourself in a way that you've set up your training program so that it is going to help you progress, and it is going to kind of help you hit the milestones, say, that you want to as you do compete. Um, and again, like how I said, it's sort of having that longer term outlook on things. Sometimes when you're like, right, I'm going to train in a way that's going to get me strong, by the end of the year for this competition, or, in 2 years' time, the training that you're doing today or next week um, can um, sometimes not be as engaging as you'd like it to be, or it feels like it's not making a huge amount of progress because week to week it's hard to see that. And so I think And again, this is where like being able to track stuff, even if you're just tracking it in a notebook, but especially if you're tracking it in some sort of software, being able to see the long-term trends of things really helps, because sometimes in the day-to-day you can get lost in it a little bit. And so again, this is where having a coach can help, because they have experience doing this, and they can also look at the long-term trends and be like, no, we're actually on track, things are moving well, even if today felt a little bit harder than it should have. Because performance is never linear, it's always going to undulate, and sometimes when you're at a little dip in the undulation, it can be very tempting to change tack and suddenly want to make drastic changes. So either having a coach or having the tools yourself and being able to kind of put your coaching hat on and take a little bit of a broader view can really help. Because again, like nobody gets like properly strong in a short amount of time. So it helps to just be able to zoom out, take a bit of a longer look at things. I think that can be hard to do initially. I think again, as with other sports, that if you do run into any injuries or sickness, or even just like life stress and exam periods, or busy periods at work, or had clients who've had kids, and so suddenly their sleep's turned upside down for a while, it can be hard to be able to contextualize and make sense of how that impacts your training, and know that it's not going to be a forever thing, and be able to make sort of educated changes to it so that you can still make the most of that time, whether you're injured and you need to train around it. And powerlifting has a very low injury risk compared to a lot of sports. But like anything, sort of statistically, if you do something for several thousand hours, you're going to get little things that crop up here and there, even with absolute best practices. And so I think that can be something when athletes run into that, and that's kind of all they can see, because that's what's happening right now. Again, being able to zoom out, either have a coach that helps you do that, or being able to do that yourself can really help. Because depending on what's going on, whether it's you've had a kid or you've got a more serious injury, sometimes you kind of have to be able to zoom out and just stick with it for like a year before it really starts getting back on track to where you'd like to be. Um, yeah. Um, yeah, and then I think other than that, powerlifting for the most part is like an amateur sport, meaning that no one's, or very few people are doing it as their full-time job. So most people are juggling families and jobs and stuff on top of that. So I think one struggle for a lot of powerlifters, like even people who are top in the country or competing at Worlds, will still have other full-time things that they're having to do on the side. So being able to navigate how to train and still keep the rest of life on track can be a struggle.
Wow, that's really helpful to know. I think there's a lot of room to balance and recover and still push limits, and uh, definitely a lot of effort goes into it. I know you've been talking a lot. I don't want to take up too much of your time as well. Wanted to just jump into a last question that would really love to know is, you've been working with a lot of athletes, and any memorable journey or progression that you have seen that you'd really love to share, that you found it really inspiring?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the kind of the two most satisfying scenarios, and there's kind of a few athletes that fall into each of this situation, has been um, like last year I got to coach at the Masters Powerlifting Worlds. So in powerlifting, you have the Masters category, which is basically everyone over 40 years old. And I was able to go and help a friend of mine, and actually one of the people who introduced me to powerlifting, and help her or support her on the day where she competed at Masters Worlds. That was a really cool experience. She won her category and did like super well on that day. So that sort of thing is obviously super satisfying, and be able to see the sort of upper edges of performance. But then the other side of things that has been super satisfying is often helping athletes navigate longer term injuries. Athletes or individuals, even if they're not competing, I kind of just call them all athletes if they're training. And there was one person in particular who had sort of chronic back issues, had been on lots and lots and lots of pain medication and that sort of thing for a really long time. And being able to, over the course of, again, a few years, so it's like it's a long outlook on things, help her to kind of transition away from pain medication and actually return to training pretty normally. And, there's still things that she has to manage with it and stuff. But that's been super satisfying because for several years prior to that, she hadn't kind of got anywhere with it or made any progress with it, and just assumed that she wasn't going to be able to return to training, and assumed that she would have to deal with some sort of like pain throughout the day all the time. And it's not like I'm, magic or some, medical mastermind, but a lot of the time it was just the result of like small, consistent changes that she was making, turning up, a couple of days a week, doing training that she could, doing training that was making small incremental progress for her. And then that just accumulating over time, and over time that opened up to her being able to do more things. And, occasionally there'd be a bit of a setback and we'd have to pull back a little bit and then build up on that again. And again, it's not like a very like sexy process or something that's super exciting at the time, because it can be quite monotonous and take a long time. But even if it takes, 2 years to fix something like that, but the next like 30 years of your life, you have a high quality of life. That's, a pretty small investment. And again, like other athletes who were looking at possibly getting surgery for an injury and then decided to do a more conservative approach first and worked either with myself and a physiotherapist or something at the same time. And again, was able to sort of make incremental changes to what they were doing, and sort of build on top of that, and ended up having better function in their shoulder or whatever injury they'd had, because they were able to rehab it through training, rather than needing to have surgery that can leave you sometimes with some limitations. So I think being able to walk somebody through that process, and for them to be able to come out the other side of it and have sort of a better prognosis long term is really satisfying.
These are definitely very inspiring stories, too. Thanks for sharing them. And I think at least I got a very great overview of how this entire industry works, where to start. At some point, if I ever want to get into it, I think this is a great place to start.
Definitely. I always say everyone is somewhere on their arc to becoming a powerlifter. Like,
And I think that's
even if you don't know it yet, you're just somewhere on the road there.
and I'll stick to at least being consistent and working out, and probably at
Yeah.
some point getting there. But no, thanks, Luke. This is really exciting to hear
You're
and
welcome.
learn more about this industry. Really appreciate you for the time and going through all the specific details around it. Thank you so much.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks